the harder the round, the more appropriate the cap table at the end of it, because it really just does filter out anyone who's not necessarily interested. I'm Tess. I am the co-founder and CEO of Bea Fertility. And Bea Fertility is a young startup that has just closed a pre-seed round. And we are working on democratizing access to fertility care.
Perfect. So why did you start this business? How did this come about?
It's a great question. So my co-founder, David, is a clinical embryologist, and he was working in clinics on Harley Street. And I think over the years of working in clinic, he noticed a lot of people coming through the door, and he sort of was beginning to realize that not all of those people were necessarily ready for IVF. Not all of them needed IVF. And so he started to sort of explore what could people try at home before they walked through the doors of the clinic. And the more he started looking at home, the more he realized that actually there's so little there. And so he began to work on what eventually became what we have today, which is an at-home fertility treatment. So I joined him somewhere along that journey, and we've been building the treatment together.
Mm. And obviously with it being a clinical treatment, it's so known that people go to doctors or hospitals for this. So how do you battle, or I suppose educate customers that actually this product does work well and it works at home? How do you change that mindset?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it's an opportunity to speak a little bit to the product and what we're building. So we are building at-home fertility care that is based on what used to be an old clinical treatment. So what we're effectively doing is bringing that clinical treatment back and bringing it back in a way that makes it easy to do at home. So the kit is based on a clinical treatment called intracervical insemination. So intracervical insemination effectively involves holding semen against the cervix for extended amounts of time. And it used to be the de facto fertility treatment sort of right up until the mid to late 70s, which is when IVF came along. When IVF came along, IUI, intrauterine insemination, also came along. And IUI is a much more profitable treatment for clinics to offer. So what happened is ICI, cervical insemination, just kind of dropped off the map as a clinical offering. It doesn't mean that it's less effective. It doesn't mean that it doesn't work. It just means that it made more business sense for fertility clinics to hop over straight into IUI. So in 2018, a couple of peer-reviewed papers were released. And the conclusion of these papers was that there's really actually no evidence to suggest that ICI is any less effective than IUI, which is, IUI, uterine insemination, is now the most popular fertility treatment globally. So really what we're doing is bringing ICI back. So we're not reinventing the wheel. We're not creating a completely new fertility treatment. We're taking something that used to exist in the clinical world for many reasons, none of which are efficacy-based, no longer exists, and we're bringing it back and recreating a treatment experience that is simple and intuitive enough that people can do it at home.
And unfortunately, infertility is still a massively taboo subject for some reason. I think probably particularly in the UK. So again, has that been a challenge so far? Is that something you'll see as a challenge going forward?
Yeah, it's a shame that fertility is still taboo. Particularly in certain cultures. I would actually argue that in the UK, we talk about it more than many other cultures sort of globally. So I think I came out of the sex tech world, so taboo is something that I'm very familiar with. And the migration from sex tech into fertility, I thought that maybe that would not be such a problem. And I was sort of surprised and a little disappointed to find that it was. I think, will it be a problem? In many ways, yes, but also in some ways it's an advantage. So, people aren't talking about infertility. That doesn't necessarily mean that they don't want to. It just means that societally we've been taught that we oughtn't to. So, for example, the sort of generally accepted practice is that you don't announce a pregnancy until you're past your first trimester. Now, the only reason that we tell people not to do that is because the risk of miscarriage and complication is high in the first trimester. So really, we don't announce pregnancy, but that's driven by a societal rule that we shouldn't really talk about miscarriage. Why aren't we talking about miscarriage? 1 in 4 pregnancies, end in miscarriage, and as a result of the sort of silence, what it does is create a vacuum in which there's so much room for shame and misinformation, and so I think really what we need to do is just like pierce the walls of that vacuum and start filling it with the right kind of content and the right kind of support and education. And I see a lot of brands and a lot of influencers and a lot of accounts that are starting to make really good inroads there. And because I see this trend evolving, I think actually we're in the right place, leading the right conversations at the right time. And it's an exciting time to be talking about fertility because we're finally starting to see it in the press in a way that we've never seen it before.
And I think you're doing a good job not only of talking about it in the right way, but I think I was taking a look at your packaging as well, which is beautiful, by the way. I think it's not medical or clinical, but more, it almost looks like a beauty product, I'd say. So the feeling I got, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you were going for the angle that it should be seen around the house and it shouldn't be hidden away and so on. So was there that thought process behind it?
Yeah, good observation. You're absolutely right. It's there are a couple of sort of threads there. It's fascinating to me that you picked up on the beauty angle. For me, the way I see it is in the way that you unbox an iPhone, like an Apple product, and there's just this beautiful experience. Everything has the right feel, there's the right quality. That's the type of consumer experience that we want to create. The sort of other side of the coin is that it is a medical device at the end of the day. It's a class 2A medical device in the EU, and it is a treatment. So we don't necessarily want to move too far away from our roots as a medical device company. This is a treatment. There is efficacy. There's all sorts of scientific evidence to suggest that it works. And so for that reason, we would like to do sort of blend of making sure that people have the reassuring clinical sort of credible medical experience, but consumerizing and humanizing the experience in a way, because fertility treatment in a clinic is terrifying. You've got no idea where you are and what's happening. And the at-home market as it stands today can sometimes just seem a little, when you're buying fertility tea or you're being advised to steam things that should never be steamed, there's this sort of slightly sort of quack side of the market as it is today. And so I think we have a responsibility to build a brand and a user experience that is simultaneously clinical and human. And whether we have that right today is sort of up for debate, and it's something we talk about all the time at Bea, but it's a really important and fine balance, and it's one that we know we need to get right.
And I guess that kind of brings us back then to, it's the fine balance to make people comfortable to do this at home. It's making them comfortable. Absolutely. So reassuring them that it's clinical.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. And when the box is, when the box is on your bedside table or in your bathroom cabinet or wherever you want to be doing this treatment at home, wherever that box is, it wouldn't look out of place in on a beautiful display of other things that you happen to have in your bathroom. So I think that the goal is to create an experience that seamlessly integrates with how you live your life at home, but also just has a slight edge, a slight clinical sort of side that gives you the confidence and the credibility and just reinforces the message that, hey, this is a clinical treatment. You're actually taking steps to treat the issue of conceiving at home. Because I think, when you look at the ecosystem in the fertility market, we see so many things that support getting pregnant. So supplements, LH tests, like I said, tea, acupuncture, there's sort of this whole network of support services and products, but there actually is very little that addresses the issue of getting you pregnant. And so I think, that's why we're so passionate about building the hardware and being hardware first and building these kits, because it's a problem, it still exists. There's really no viable solution, and we want to be able to get that out into people's hands as quickly as possible.
Perfect. And you recently went through the funding process to make this all. So tell me a bit about your experiences of that.
Yeah, so we just closed our pre-seed round. you know, we went to press, we called it $1 million. It was that sort of combination angel VC and combination and Innovate UK Smart Grant. And it all sort of landed at the same time. So we sort of lumped it into one round. It was an interesting round for a couple of reasons. We opened the round at a time that made sense for us, but it maybe didn't make sense for investors. We also opened the round just as the world was going into a wave of second lockdown. So there had been all of the sort of fear around the first lockdown and how that impacted investor decisions and capital. We opened our round at a time when a lot of people were putting their capital in a holding pattern. So they were sort of just waiting to see. You know, we'd done the first lockdown, so we kind of knew what was happening. We're going into the second lockdown, so we sort of thought we knew what was happening, but we also didn't. So everyone was just sort of holding. And as a result, it did make it, it was a complex raise. I actually don't think that's a bad thing. I think it shows sort of tenacity and grit, and we got there, which is great. But I think often we like to make these big press announcements about how we've closed the round, and it makes it look as though there was no journey in the lead up to that. And so I think that takes away founders' permission to talk about that and to sort of, you know, to go through that journey and feel all of the ups and downs that that journey brings with it. But I think that's sort of taking you on a bit of a tangential line of thinking there. Raising the round was interesting. It really helped us crystallize our vision for the company. It actually going and talking to investors about creating a medical device is a really hard conversation to have, because immediately every single one of them is going to say, well, go away and get it certified, get it one step closer to getting to market. And of course, there's so much involved in that. It's not a cheap process. So we needed money. So I think what that did was immediately identify investors who really bought into the vision and who really just wanted to come with us. And I think for me, I'm really grateful that it was so specific a company to invest in, because it means that I look at my cap table and I'm so proud of who's on there, and every single one of them are on there for a reason, right? They really buy into what we're doing. They really believe in what we're doing, and they really support us as we're doing it. So I think it's, you know, the harder the round, the more appropriate the cap table at the end of it, because it really just does filter out anyone who's not necessarily interested. And that's something that I'm sort of starting to think quite deeply about. And also our cap table, there are a couple of funds, but of all of the angels on the cap table, it's an equal split, 50-50 female male angel investor. And that's something that I stand by, and I'm you know, quite proud of, particularly given some of the narratives we hear around female angels being a little bit more risk averse. And I mean, God, imagine investing in a D2C medically regulated company that's pioneering a new treatment and is pre-seed and regulatory approval. It's pretty much as high risk as it gets. So to sort of have that balance on the cap table is something that I'm really proud of. And I think it's because it speaks to what we're doing and the fact that it's sort of a universal problem. We all know someone who's been touched by infertility, and the sort of investors that attracted to us is ended up being a really good thing.
Incredible. And it must help being fully aware of the risks involved in investing in an organization like yours at that stage. So obviously founders go through this process where they're getting everything in line in the lead up to a round. Is there anything that once you're actually open the round that you realized, you know what, we've not done enough work on this, or we need to change this, or anything that you suddenly had to change once the round had started?
Absolutely. I think anyone that says that they go into a funding round knowing all of the answers and having the journey and the path absolutely set is probably very rare. You know, investors will ask you questions, they will challenge you, they will push, they will open your eyes to other things. You know, they've probably seen more companies than you have as a founder. And so I think going into the journey, we'd made certain assumptions about what we were pitching. We'd made certain assumptions about who to go to for that. And as it turns out, the nature of the conversation when we were pitching hardware was sort of, it was a very different conversation to when we went in and started pitching our vision for a sort of digital platform to surround this hardware. So the minute we went from pitching what was pretty much a pure hardware play with a mock-up of an app, because if you don't have a mock-up of an app on a phone in your deck, who are you? But it was pretty much a pure hardware play. And then we flipped over to talking a little bit more about the vision for the company, which was this sort of digital platform that would overhang a portfolio of product-based, sort of hardware-based products that would provide concrete touch points and would sort of solve problems. You know, I think apps and the digital space is brilliant in supporting people, but in the medical field, if you really want to treat something that is, you know, somewhere on the body, it often will require hardware. And so when we started to talk about the company as if we were looking, you know, 5 years ahead, it really did change the nature of the conversations that we were having with investors. And I think that really opened up who we could go to, and it made for a selection of really interesting chats. And we ended up speaking to completely different funds. You know, one of our funds, the fund that ended up leading the round, and usually invest in digital health. So it really did sort of evolve as we went through, and you know, the graphics evolved, the way we sort of modeled the kit evolved, the way we sort of talked about it, structured our pitch, and it's an ever evolving process. And I really did learn that throughout this round.
So what's next for the business then? What are the big goals over the next 12 months or so?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we've closed it, so it's time to run like hell. Our third co-founder, CPO, sort of technical person, joined the team actually this week, Monday. And we also had a UX, UI designer and researcher join the team last week, Monday. We're probably going to make one more hire. That's probably going to take the form of a chief medical officer, someone who can start to sort of build credibility in the sort of medical community for the company. Really, from a team perspective, that's as deep as it's going to get before our next funding round. From a product perspective, when we raised with a prototype. So we now have to take that prototype through a whole design process to get it to a place where it can be manufactured, and to make sure that it works. And that whole process is something that's going to take a little bit of time. And in tandem, we're running a regulatory approval process. So we need to get a CE mark in the EU, which involves going through the MDR regulatory framework. And then in the US, it's a 510K clearance process. So we're sort of going through those side by side. We'll run a clinical study in the US towards the end of the summer, and look at developing the digital products and seeing what we can do on the digital side ahead of being able to launch physical products into the market. So the next 12 months is really a lot of product finalization, defining and building the digital product roadmap, and trying to bring that all together and onto the market in a cohesive way.
Perfect. So for those listening then, where can they find out more about both yourselves and the company?
Yeah, so you can find the company online. We are starting to get better at content and executing on a bit of a, for want of a better metaphor, embryonic go-to-market strategy there. So you can definitely find us online, find us on LinkedIn. We're pretty easy to reach out to. You know, we're always picking up email, LinkedIn messages. So find us online. And for anyone who's looking for fertility treatment, it's likely that we'll be launching towards the very end of this year, early next.